Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to go over some beginner mountain bike maintenance and some things to check out before you take your bike for a ride. So whether you have a full suspension bike or a hardtail, a lot of the same principles apply. For areas that we want to check over, make sure they're good and snug before we go out for a ride each time. Doing this will help prevent you from getting stuck a couple miles out on the trail with a bike that's no longer working. So the very first thing that I like to do before every ride is to check the air pressure in my tires. If you leave your bike for a couple days, you may see it drop a couple PSI. In this case, the bike's been sitting for a little while, so I'm expecting it's going to be low. This bike does have an inner tube inside the tire, and this is what's called a Presta valve. It's different than the Schrader valve. You have to unscrew this little silver piece at the top, and that's what depresses and lets air out. So we're going to pump this up to about 35 PSI because it has an inner tube in it. And what we're going to do is just pop this on, lock it shut. I would recommend investing in a floor pump. It's a lot faster than having to use the temporary or emergency hand pumps for the work. So anyways, we're going to get this thing, as you can see, it's below 20 PSI. And we're going to work on pumping it up to about 30-35 PSI for this bike. And you can tell how much air your tires can take by looking at the sidewall. It will give a recommended amount of air pressure to put inside the tire. Here we're already at 20 PSI. If you had been doing this with a smaller hand pump, it would take much longer and more effort. Okay, now we repeat the same process for the front tire. And we want to do this every ride to make sure we have enough air in our tires. We do this to, one, give us more grip, be able to handle the terrain we're riding, and two, we don't want to damage the rim or mess with our spoke tension by having not enough air pressure in here. If you hit something hard enough, you're going to actually dent that rim, and rims are not cheap to replace. There we go. Okay, so it's pretty simple for the next step. Make sure your brakes are working. I'm going to give them a couple squeezes, make sure there's some pretty good tension in there. You can also check your brake pads at the same time. Make sure that they're actually working, and these are really hard to see, so we'll check them out on my bike. That's a set of hydraulic disc brakes in the back and in the front of this one as well. But you just want to give your levers a quick squeeze, make sure they're working. Make sure the bell works. Yep, works. We're good. Okay, from there, we want to make sure that our headset is nice and tight. So just put an Allen key on that. Make sure you got good, the bolt's not moving on you. And then same thing with the front of your stem. You got 4 bolts, 1, 2, 3, 4. Make sure all those are good and snug. This is where the full suspension and the hardtail, in this case, are going to start to differ a little. So this is a quick release lever. This is your front axle. So we want to make sure that this is in the up position. This is the correct position to have it in, by the way. So just make sure it's nice, good and snug. Your wheels are your axle's all the way in the bottom of the fork in this case. Now we do not want to have this thing facing forward and tightened, because you can have a stick that comes in there, catches it, and either launches you over the handlebars or can pop your wheel open, and then what happens? Wheel goes missing. Bad thing. So always have it in an up position, generally right in front of the fork leg, just like that. Pretty good right there. Okay. On the opposite side of the wheel, there's a little thumb screw here. Now, if we were to remove the wheel, we would loosen the lever on one side, and then this little bolt, plastic bolt right here, we would turn it left to be able to slide the wheel out of the fork. Okay? We want to tighten that back up. And you can do this all by hand, you know, just kind of get a good feeling or gauge with your hands. This is an aluminum frame bike, and this fork is a beast. You don't have to worry about it. It's a spring fork. You're not going to break it. Anyways, so that one's good to go. And then we would go ahead and do the same thing for the back. Just make sure that the tension on this little lever right here is good. And this one is in the up position as well. So pretty much it keeps you from having any trail debris hit this. If this was down here, you could have a stick or a rock come in and this lever would pop right open, your wheel would become loose, and you could possibly lose it. So these are safety things that keep us able to keep going back out to the trails and enjoy ourselves. So for the last thing we want to do before we go out for any bike ride is we want to make sure that the gears are shifting. So if you do not have a bike stand at this time, you just got into the sport, it's a really easy way that we can check this. So in my case, my homemade stand, just take the bike, flip it right upside down. Now you can check your shifting. So there we go. Everything is working. Now this bike, as you can see, has multiple gears in the front, 2 gears in the front, so we'll check those too. Sure, yeah, shifts nicely down to the lower cog. Back up into the larger cog. Now these two bikes are made out of 2 different materials. The bike on the right, the blue hardtail, is made out of aluminum, and the bike on the left, the full suspension bike, has a carbon fiber frame. So having to tighten the components on the carbon fiber frame, you have to be a little more careful. So we would purchase something like a torque wrench to make sure that we're safe when we're tightening bolts on a carbon frame. Don't have to worry so much about this with aluminum. It's a harder, it's a different type of alloy. It's a metal, and I really don't worry so much about tightening. You know, you can do it by hand, by feel. I'm pretty used to that. A little more forgiving. Whereas carbon fiber, if you over tighten it, you could actually break the carbon fiber, and then you've gone and ruined your bike frame. So on this bike, this frame, the front triangle, the rims are both carbon fiber, whereas this back triangle, you can kind of see the weld there. There's a weld there. It's made out of aluminum for the rear triangle, and you'll notice that in quite a few full suspension bikes. You'll also notice some of the really high-end bikes have the full carbon fiber rear triangle as well. I'm actually kind of happy that it's an aluminum rear triangle, because sometimes you get rocks up in there, and there's a lot of force on the back side of the bike. You know, most of my weight is back there, so I just feel a little better with the aluminum in the back. So as I just mentioned, you may want to end up purchasing a torque wrench. This Tecton torque wrench has been absolutely great. It handles stuff in Newton meters and inch pounds. I've had no issues with it, and it's probably the closest to being properly calibrated that you can find without spending a lot more money on certain blue tools. Anyways, I would get the blue tool, but I don't own a bike shop, so I don't see the point in it. This thing works fine. I got this on Amazon. So I would do the same process on the full suspension bike as I would with the hardtail before I go for a ride each time. First thing I do is I check my tire pressure. Make sure it's good. This part screws out. I put the pump on. I usually run 20 psi in the front tire because there is no inner tube in this tire. This tire is a tubeless ready tire, and it has tubeless ready rims. So the only thing that's inside this tire is some sealant. So I typically use orange seal tire sealant. You just pour in about half the bottle and you're good to go. You don't have to worry about any tubes breaking. The tire sealant will actually, if you puncture a tire, the sealant will come out. Hello. The sealant will come out through the rubber and seal your tire. So you don't really ever notice that you have a flat or anything like that unless you really rip the tire or the sidewall. But I haven't had any problems in 3 years with it at all. I have noticed that the sealant has plugged whatever holes I made in my tires before I even knew about it. I think the last time I noticed it was at the bike park, and at the end of the day, after my final run, I looked down and I noticed my tire had a couple little white spots in it, and that's where the sealant had come through the tire and sealed it. So I really hadn't lost any tire pressure at all, and definitely did not notice it. It's a really cool thing. So this bike is a little different. It has a through axle on it, no quick release at all. And on the bolt cap here, it says that you want to set the torque between 80 and 120 inch-pounds. So in that case, I usually set it to 90 inch-pounds. Now I want to check to make sure with our torque wrench set to 90 inch-pounds. Stick that in there. Oh, my axle was a little loose. Okay, so when we tighten it with a torque wrench, we want to wait to hear a click. You'll feel the click too as you go and push down, and that's telling you that you've reached the proper torque. So let's go ahead and do this. So, coming down. Not yet. That was it. Now we are at the proper torque, 90 inch-pounds. You always want to be careful getting that out. You do not want to round that bolt. Okay, so same as other bike. Next thing we do is we want to check our brakes. Make sure they're working. They don't feel spongy, anything like that. They're actually actuating properly. Now, we may actually be able to see back here. I can't tell if you'll be able to see or not, but there's the brake pads. This is the rear brake caliper. When you squeeze, brake pads are working. It's always good to check your brakes. Your brakes are probably one of the most important things on the bike. Without good brakes, you can't go fast. So after we make sure that our tire pressure is good, our brakes are good, you always want to check your stem, make sure these bolts are good, nice and snug, cap, 2 side bolts. That's another thing that's very important, is you want this handlebar to be very, very firm when you're riding. This is what you control the bike with. Okay, so if you do have a bike stand, last thing you want to check before you go for any ride is you want to make sure that your bike is actually shifting. So I got my shifter up here. I'll try to do it so you can see. So just go up, make sure it hits all the gears. And that's good enough for me. In the future, I'll do a more in-depth video on how to fix simple shifting issues. Now, full suspension bikes, past the shifting point, once every couple weeks, check the air pressure in your rear shock and your front fork. This is the compression damper. Air's on the other side. Just to make sure you're good. They really shouldn't lose any air as long as the stanchions haven't gotten scratches. And if you take care of your stuff, it'll last a long time. So when you get done with your bike ride for the day, if you were in really wet conditions, or if say you washed your bike, you're going to want to apply some new lubricant to your chain. So depending on where you ride, for me, almost always I end up going through a stream or the bike gets wet, so I use wet lubricant. If you live somewhere where you're not going to get wet, you know, or even the trail system, you don't have any water to worry about, you can go ahead and use dry lubricant. So the real big difference is that the dry lubricant won't pick up a lot of gunk, whereas the wet lubricant will pick up everything that's on the trail every single time. But it's made to be a little more water resistant than if this hits water, it's gone, and then you have no lube left on the chain. Well-lubed chain means the bike's going to ride a heck of a lot better. Well, I hope you found this beginner bike maintenance video helpful. Just check those first 6 things. Your axles, your bike tires, brakes, all the bolts up in your stem, and your shifting before you go for every ride. And you'll be sure to have a very good, safe ride. I'll put out some more videos on some simple maintenance techniques and things you can do to keep your bike lasting longer. And as always, I hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you have a great day, and if you get a chance, go out and ride your bike. We'll see you next time.